At the moment we're a grip with all these rumours of Led Zeppelin to reform and God knows what else.
Maybe they do both.
You never know. Oh my God.
Oh my God! Who are you?
King Diamond. It's not...
Since the onslaught of Alice Cooper, shock rock has wreaked havoc on many a happy household, and every generation, it seems, has its acid-spewing adherents. From the Coop himself in the 70s to Marilyn Manson in the 90s, but while bands like Wasp and Lizzie Borden had it nailed on the band front, in a solo shock rock context, the 80s belonged to just one man, King Goddamn Diamond! And before any of you pipe the fuck up with supplications to his predecessor, I love me some Merciful Fate, and once a few odds and ends I'm waiting for in the mail materialize on my doorstep, I may well begin the preliminary work of wanking it to fucking fate. But for now, it's time to pay tribute to the king! For King Diamond would break away from the Danish compatriots Hank Sherman, Michael Denner, Timmy Hansen, and Kim Roos and storm the globe, in the process trailblazing his own inimitable brand of hellish, high-concept, horror-themed heavy metal that veers dangerously proximitous at times to prog metal without once boring the piping fresh shit out of the listener. I hope you're taking notes, maiden. Fortunately, Denner and Hansen joined the Monarch in exile on rhythm guitar and bass respectively, and so with 3/5 of the Merciful Fate firestorm raging at his back, he broke out the lighter fuel, shack it up with a world-class lineup that remains legendary even today. The immortal Andy LaRocque on guitar, and Motorhead and Doc and demigod Mickey D on drums. Without further ado, may I present the Shaitan of shock metal, auditory evil incarnate, the only man Tipper Gore correctly accused of being a Satanist, King fucking Diamond!
I just can't believe in God because he's that evil. And he'll respond, evil, what do you mean by that, But if he is so all-powerful and almighty, why can't he come down to earth and show himself to people so that they can see that he's for real and that he's the guy to believe in. Instead he sits up in his heaven, those people, they don't believe in me, and when that final day comes, I'm going to roast them in hell. And if that's not terrifying, not evil, I don't know what evil is.
Why doesn't Merciful Fate exist anymore? Because I left the band right after our last gig, which was in Copenhagen on the 11th of April, and it was due to a lot of things, mostly the musical side of the whole thing, because Hank Sherman, the earlier guitarist, used to write most of Merciful Fate songs. He totally twisted over his musical attitude and wanted to play very poppy music.
We started writing songs very different, me, Hank, and King. So he had to make a decision, to carry on with the stuff he liked. So that's the reason why we had to split.
To comprehend why King Diamond's debut sounds so distinct from what would follow, you must first comprehend the context. Merciful Fate were fucking studs. Somewhere between thrash, shock rock, and black metal, with a particularly pioneering influence on the latter, they launched many a mother into spasmodic seizures of satanic panic. Dark, demonic, and heavier than grizzly bear balls, they carved a cozy little alcove for themselves in the burgeoning black metal movement. And then, 2 albums in, they dropped the C word. Commercial.
Hank Sherman, who used to write most of the songs, he came up with new material which had nothing to do with Merciful Fate at all, and he insisted on getting on the next album. It was pure pop music, and I wouldn't put my name to that.
And in fairness, on paper, they had all the pieces to do precisely that. Soaring frontman with an eye-catching look? Check. Killer fucking fretwork? Oh, so very check. And the songs were sensational, at least within their appointed genre. In theory, they were sitting on the Danish counterpart to Priest. In practice, the King and Company had loftier aims of unbridled extremity, and so Sherman fucked off to form a fairly exceptional AOR band by the name of Fate. While the world braced itself for the coming of the King. And when it dropped, it did not disappoint. A continuance of the morbid predilections of prior efforts, with 3/5 of the fucking band in tow, you could almost consider Fatal Portrait the third Merciful Fate record, rather than the first King Diamond.
Again, the music have changed a little bit, but it's like a natural improvement from our last album, you know, Don't Break the Oath. This one could just as well be the third Merciful Fate album.
Yet largely due to how seminal subsequent albums would be, I found far too many miss out on Fatal Portrait, or worse still, hang the picture disc, never open it, and reduce one of the finest efforts of the King's career to glorified goddamn wall art. Why not frame it in crushed velvet while you're at it, you poserific pussies? But fie on those fuckers, because holy shit, what an album! Are his vocals an acquired taste? No. Diabetic cum is an acquired taste. Ask Movie Bob's Tube Sock. King Diamond is anything but insurmountable for the true metal faithful, and the heavy metal monarch in question knows better than to assail your ears with an unremitting deluge of dirge shrieks, mixing it up with mid-range snarls and ungodly growls. And with a thicker production with more bottom end than later albums would feature, I find Fatal Portrait is actually an easier listen. Regardless, alongside subsequent albums, the musicianship might appear comparatively simplistic, but lean in closer and you'll eventually unfurl a rich metallic tapestry encompassing everything from speed metal and thrash metal to, honestly, Candlemass-esque doom. And what truly shines here for me, though, is King Diamond's rapidly maturing mastery of lyrical storytelling. After the satanic screeds of Merciful Fate, here we're treated to a ghost story worthy of a Hammer horror production. In fact, the first 4 tracks and the closer, Haunted, form a cohesive whole, as King Diamond relays the morbid tale of a mother spiraling into insanity who locks her only daughter in the attic to suffer, starve, and die, only to be haunted to madness and ultimately murder by her daughter's very own visage as it speaks to her via the eponymous Fatal Portrait. Shit from the King, but while it wears its conceptual aspirations on its album sleeve, Fatal Portrait is still not quite the full-blown concept album to follow.
I'm King Diamond here, hosting on the Headbangers Ball, and I got a nasty little story to read to you. Listen carefully. Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go.
What to say about one of the defining metal masterpieces of the 1980s? Everything Fatal Portrait does, Abigail does, even fucking more. Sweeping solos? Got him. Mickey D drum acrobatics? Got him. Ear-splitting screams? Got him in goddamn spades. Horror story subplot? Bitch, the entire album is a Victorian horror story.
In the past, particularly I think on Merciful Fate records, you sung about Satan and the devil, call it what you will, but Abigail is more of a horror story. Has that been a conscious move away from talking specifically about the devil?
In a way, you know, a lot of people have misunderstood this all the time. They still misunderstand this word, and that's why we took the word away already with the former album, Fatal Portrait. So this time we just, you know, it was like a big challenge to me to write a full story for an album, because I've never done that before. This is the biggest thing I've done lyrical-wise.
And boasting perhaps the finest production of the band's entire catalog, particularly the remastered Metal Blade edition from a few years back, it punches harder than Michael Avenatti on a Kentucky bourbon bender. Guitars that crunch like charred bone, drums that kick like an ornery mule, and the King himself has never sounded finer. Relayed via frame narrative, Abigail tells the tale of a young 19th century couple who move into an inherited mansion that proves to be haunted upon encountering the resident family ghost, who turns out to be the previous count of the manor and thusly a blood relative. Protagonist Jonathan LaFay learns the mansion was the site of a grisly, double murder. When the Count learned his wife sucked off a stranger and was now carrying his bastard spawn, he did the polite thing and plunked her down a flight of fucking stairs.
Break your neck!
It's then the Count informs young Jonathan that his wife Miriam will soon be with child, the spiritual incarnation of the stillborn fetus. Her name? Abigail. The only way to vanquish the specter possessing his wife? You guessed it, smash her on some stairs as well. Yet Jonathan can't bring himself to do the dirty deed, coaxing young Miriam into reclaiming control of her body just long enough to conspire on an alternate method of exorcising the fetal fucking demon. She asks Jonathan to follow her down to the attic, yet as they stand atop the basement staircase and prepare to descend, well...
And she was there like a ghost. She pushed him hard and clean to the bottom of the stairs. To the bottom of the stairs.
Horror metal masterwork, and one that, like all good slasher flicks, left ample room for a sequel. Fuck, it was bad enough for Capcom to pay homage to in the arcade classic Final Fight by the inclusion of a metal boss in suspiciously familiar regalia named, you guessed it, Abigail. Suffice to say, King Diamond, just a smidge influential in Japan.
Who the heck are you?
I am your master, the wise and powerful, the most magnificent and beautiful, the deadliest lord of the undead, the great Count Diamond!
Sharp, pounding, percussive, yet polished, and surprising everyone involved at over 250,000 copies sold, commercially successful as well. No mean feat for a dude in a Dracula cape, particularly in the 80s, when full concept albums were anything but en vogue. Yet here was King Diamond, 1 full year before Queensryche's Operation Mindcrime, and 4 before Wasp the Crimson Idol, cranking out the concept metal LP to end them all. So beyond bitchin', in fact, who knows? Maybe we'll all see a sequel. Yet in all its murderous majesty, even Abigail couldn't prepare us all for the conceptual colossus to come.
Satanic symbols filled the air at this concert by Danish-born King Diamond.
How much can you influence kids? I think people are too clever to be influenced by watching a band or listening to an album to go out and do the same. Because if they were that easy to influence, watching the news, you get the real thing, and everybody knows that, right into your living room.
After the welcome but unexpected success of Abigail and resultant exhaustive tour of both Europe and the States, former Merciful Fate members Michael Denner and Timmy Hansen would tender their walking papers. Filling the void would be longtime bassist Hal Patino, and presumably at Mickey D's behest, his former bandmate in the wildly underrated Danish band Geisha, Pete Black. But if there were any doubt King Diamond's freshly minted road warriors would rise to the occasion, them silences every fucking one. The one detractor it didn't silence had the surname Simmons. Gene Simmons of a corporation known as Kiss, who patented his mom's pussy on the way out of the birth canal, spotted a fellow face painter on MTV one evening and giddily smacked King Diamond with a lawsuit for trademark infringement.
Now, they claim that King's facial makeup design comes too close to the makeup design of Mr. Simmons. In a letter warning King Diamond about the makeup confusion, the lawyers also stated that, quote, Kiss has federally registered trademarks on its facial makeup. You must provide us with written assurance that you will immediately cease using the infringing makeup, unquote. A spokesperson for King Diamond stated that the King was going to change his makeup anyway.
I've never in my life heard any fan or anybody not being able to see the difference between whether it was Gene Simmons or King Diamond he saw a picture of. Never in my life. Furthermore, it said in the letter that I had adopted certain mannerisms of his, which I certainly hope not.
But again, it was, I don't know, publicity stunt, whatever. He wanted to get some publicity. They shouldn't need that, but, you know, it gave us a lot too, so thank you, Gene. Anytime.
Yeah, good thing Alice Cooper didn't do the same in the 70s, huh, sweetie? Let's be real here. Gene Simmons would copyright a copyright symbol. But like Gene with Another Man's Wife, this story has a happy ending, as it led to King Diamond's semi-annual practice of subtly and satanically altering his face paint's appearance between albums to better reflect the theme. And so has spawned the spectral visage of them-era King Diamond, eschewing the spiky tendrils of previous outings for wraith-like wisps of black and ghostly white, an evident visual reflection of the haunting to come. With yet another mansion setting, the feeble-minded fan might suspect repetition, but here's where the Abigail similarities end. This is a more intimate tale of a family welcoming their ailing grandmother home from a long spell in a mental asylum. The resultant greeting birthed many a voice-cracking parody from few a fucking Jay and Silent Bob fan.
The first of the fallen, the spoiler of virgins, the master of abortions.
You know I don't like to talk about dark forces, Randall.
Let me help you out of your chair, Grandma. Grandma, what was it like?
King Diamond this time around is a self-insert, playing the part of a doe-eyed little dipshit who slowly realizes his grandmother, and ultimately himself, have been hopelessly ensnared by invisible guests he knows only as them. The voices of the nameless they sing serenades to the young king, enrapturing him in demonic delirium, and ultimately inciting him to cut the phone lines. While his sister Missy refuses to have anything fucking to do with it, they, or possibly King Diamond under their thrall, chop her ass into kibbles and bits. Aware of his impending doom, it dawns on him that the apparitions lose power outside the confines of the mansion itself, so he lures his apparently possessed grandma out of the gate and hacks her into ground goddamn beef. Apprehended and incarcerated in an asylum himself, it appears that would be the end of the story. Yet aware his high-concept efforts were being met with ever-increasing praise, the Diamond Duke did like all great horror directors and saved room for the sequel. As he returns home to find the death of his grandma did precisely dick to dispel the omnipresent them.
Now come inside, my dear. It's good to see you again. Despite what you did to my throat, they're waiting upstairs.
The music here just kills. Ever more complex and precise than its forebears, here King Diamond laughs from mere theatrical thrash with a technical flair to what can arguably be labeled prog metal without once abandoning the brutality. If I have one gripe, it's that King's voice, largely as a result of a fair bit too fucking much falsetto, and of course late 80s reverb humping production proclivities, his hellish scream has been elevated to a piercing, Muppet-like screech at times, and over the lengthy listening sessions a concept record demands, this can pierce like a porn star dick, but the material is metal squared and more than makes up for it as a result, with particular attention to the jaw-dropping skincraft of Mickey D, who by now was lapsing into borderline Neil Peart territory, and unfortunately for the fucking fans, he was hating every minute of it, but more on that in a minute. A commercial and creative Goliath, the Them album crushed the fucking charts to this day, remaining his sole effort to pierce the top 100, although previous and subsequent releases would come pretty damn close. Yet for all its hellish majesty, the story was just getting started, as it was intended from the outset as merely the first chapter in a darksome duology, and a full year later we were due for a follow-up.
The album Them and Conspiracy are one big horror story. They're connected totally. They also want to get rid of me because my mother is still scared of me. She's convinced from what Dr. Landau told her that I was the one who tried to kill her because of her open wounds, the cuts in her arm that we used for the tea. So she wants to get rid of me because she's scared of me as well. And maybe there's a little revenge in there as well, you know. Convinced the local priest to take part in this stuff so that they have an alibi. If one of them should start telling later on, the other one would have an alibi with the priest. So they're like, you know, securing themselves there by bringing him into it. And it's easy to bring him in because they just start talking about me being possessed by some kind of demon or maybe even Satan himself, you know.
Fucking take everything awesome about them, and they are many, and amplify it 80 billion butt fucking times, and then, in one final fuck yeah flourish, slather on that much needed bottom end the bitches left out on the last release, the album, Alex Jones's favorite lunatic lullaby, Conspiracy, an underrated follow-up, and for my money, the finest hour of the original incarnation of King Diamond. And for drum demigod Mickey D, it would also prove his final offensive. As a bouncing baby band, it had been all for one for all, drain your sacks before they fall, but as the band became more about its iconic archdemon frontman, slowly but surely, the same syndrome that afflicted a young Alice Cooper band crept into King Diamond.
We were a band. We were a team, and we really enjoyed what we were doing. It all came to an end where I didn't feel very happy in the band anymore. We were going a little bit different direction than I thought that we've been working ourselves up to, and I moved. And me as a drummer, I like to play everything.
But at least in this instance, it truly was a case of musical differences, as the increasingly conceptual and now even prog-infused elements Mickey D felt at fucking least were now detracting from the flat-out metal.
To me, it was a natural move. I wanted to play some more straight-ahead rock and roll, and I felt a little stressed in King Diamond in the end, maybe.
And considering Mickey D is far and away one of the most technically gifted drummers in the damn genre, it wasn't a matter of not being able to play them, he was just flat out sick of the fucking prog metal preening and indulgent technicality, and so he tendered an embittered resignation and fled for the florid climes of what was supposed to be Dokken, but thanks to the other three members divesting the frontman of his own last fucking name, was ultimately named Dokken. Fortunately for the Mythos faithful, however, King Diamond didn't lose Mickey's number and enlisted him for The Conspiracy, albeit in a session musician capacity. Conceptually, this was a much more simplistic affair. King Diamond returns to the mansion Amon to reclaim his birthright from them, but upon striking a deal with the formless demons to resurrect his sister Missy, immediately finds himself hopelessly enmeshed in a Machiavellian murder plot by his mother and her demented therapist off his ass and claim it for their fucking own. Circuitous, but less complex than the two that preceded it. But it ain't the plot that makes this album the embodiment of the fucking shit. It's the tunes.
You see the cremation thing, the burned alive thing, you know, where the priest and the doctor and my mother at the end puts me into this coffin and burns me alive.
And it's a weird thing because you see me die on the back of the album. You see it looks like my funeral, you know. And every night on stage, I'm gonna die. You're gonna see an illusion called Burned Alive.
Conspiracy is a killer, the ideal capstone to the creative colossus that is King Diamond's 80s output, and one of the all-time ass-kicking concept albums ever conceived, and a commercial success as well, nearly cracking the top 100 on Billboard and starting a minor stir in more than the mere metal underground. Mickey D, heading Dokken word or not, would be missed, but believe it or not, the next album would not suffer from his fucking absence.
How did you do the research for the story behind the eye?
Quite a bit of it came from a book by, I think his name is Richard Cavendish, I think it's called The Black Arts. Had a lot of because most of it, you know, is actually historically correct. And then I mixed into it the little part about the necklace, the eye.
Cool.
Most of it is actually historically correct.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If you want to know which 80s metal bands were actually worth a good goddamn, watch what they did in the 90s. The posers pushed out, sold out, or checked out, while the genuine article just got heavier. Metallica cut their hair and did radio rock. Motorhead slayed us all with Sacrifice. Maiden wimped out like it was going out of style. Priest cut the 2 heaviest records of their career. I rest my case, cunts. King Diamond, I'm glad to say, fell into the latter camp, remaining one of the few elite acts that remained relevant throughout the decade, regularly packing major metal festivals, albeit increasingly in South America and in Europe, as America became collectively allergic to decent fucking music.
For instance, in Brazil, you know, and it goes for Argentina, as I told you before, but also in Brazil, where they don't, they speak Portuguese, right? And very few people understood English. But when we played the show, they were singing along with every single song, you know, and that blew my mind away. I couldn't believe it.
Which isn't to say the damage wasn't done. If I'm being honest, King Diamond was never quite the same after Mickey D's departure. Not necessarily worse, although the replacement drummers to follow were, let's just say it, fucking inferior. Nothing wrong with Snowy Shaw. He's a serviceable skin man, even if pigmentationally he makes Edgar Winter look like Mr. T. But far be it from me to mock anyone's pallor. I get a suntan opening my fucking refrigerator. And yes, Snowy did play on this shit, not a goddamn drum machine.
Someone from Candlemass, Messiah Marcolin.
Yeah, Messiah Marcolin.
Yeah, told Bills Above that on your album, The Eye, there's no drummer, and that it's all a drum machine. And a drummer named Chris Hawkins insisted that the drumming on that album does not match Snowy Shaw at all. What was the real situation?
No. Well, see, a lot of people have asked that question through times, and I'm wondering what he would know about it since he was not even part of it. But he probably has talked to Snowy and Snowy like. He was often like that sometimes. But he was playing on electronic drum pads.
Okay.
With high drum pads, you know, and that's what he played on, and that's why you hear a very consistent sound through it. But he played the drum pads.
He was actually moving his arm.
Yeah.
Instead of just pressing some
buttons. If you forgot that part, you know, that he has an idea that he was pressing, then he needs to check up big time.
Doubters in the Cult of the King, they were stone cold silent when The Eye arrived. A throat-fuckingly vicious album that may lapse just this side of too fucking far down prog metal boulevard at times, but in the overall stays the path with aplomb and utterly pounds for the duration into the convent. Father Picard behind these walls, but with ever so slightly subpar percussion, at least relative to the titan-like Mickey D that preceded him. What carries the day here is the guitar. As such, The Eye may well mark the Shredmeister Andy LaRocque's finest hour with King Diamond, and believe me, bitches, the dude has had some doozies. The Eye as a concept was a colossal undertaking compared to its predecessors. In place of a simple horror tale in multiple installments, here was a work of historical fiction using real figures from the French fucking Inquisition to weave an occult morality fable of witch-burning, sexual assault, and child murder at organized religion's behest. Each set in a separate time and period, each with a separate story, each linked by the omnipresent Eye, an occult artifact in necklace form that fries your fucking face if you dare look upon it. Sure, it's basically the glowing green goddamn orb from Heavy Metal the movie, but fuck fuck it, this record rules. The fallout, however, was less than favorable, with members moving in opposing directions and the protracted musical nutshot of the 90s pummeling the fuck away in unison. The Metal Monarch's solo concern went all but dormant for the protracted 3-year stretch that followed, but King Diamond wasn't done, and neither were his fucking friends. After an acrimonious split in the mid-80s, slowly the warring factions of Fate and King Diamond gave way to a DMZ and eventually to an outright armistice. By 1992, a long-dormant demon was soon to re-emerge.
Merciful Fate reunited. 4 out of the 5 original members are in there, and
Now, how long has it been since you played with Merciful Fate?
it's not been since '85 was the last concert. So there was a long time where we musically was not working together, but we always kept in contact because we're always good friends, you know.
When you disbanded Merciful Fate 10 years ago, you said it was because you couldn't continue with the intent of the band, that you didn't want to compromise. So why is it now right for you to get back together?
I think at that time it was due to musical differences, sure. And then I have been playing some other bands. I have been playing a band called Sosames together with Michael, and then we just started to compose in a more harder way, more harder heavy metal.
But there is a new King Diamond coming as well.
When you had the King Diamond band going, it was supposed to be picking up Merciful Fate left off, and now we get to you have a new album under the King Diamond moniker, Spider's Lullaby, that's out, and you're telling me you're doing both now.
Yes, friends, the Fate was fucking back, and while it's related, it still falls outside the purview of at least today's Metal Mythos. For now, anyways. Fortunately for devotees of Diamond, the King had not abdicated his solo crown in the process, and while the Merciful Fate material was strong, King Diamond had just hit his stride when reunion talks started broiling, and so with word King Diamond would continue, we waited for the follow-up and braced ourselves for the possibility that with its creativity pulled in 2 separate directions, the product may well find itself ever so slightly diluted in the process. What emerged instead was perhaps the most underrated record of the King's career. Gonna be blunt, between the crunchier production, less elaborate narrative, and more straight-ahead savagery in the songwriting, I do believe I may actually prefer the Spider's Lullaby to the also admittedly awesome The Eye. Though for the uninitiated, the first attribute they're likely gonna note is King's voice, which is notably more subdued than on The Eye, which again, frankly, for the better. Look, I love the man's voice, but on them, it bordered on sonic warfare. It came as a welcome shift when the conspiracy featured lower register bellows booming throughout, punctuated by the odd dog whistle diamond shriek, and the Spider's Lullaby is a direct return to that approach. And folks, being similar to the conspiracy is no fucking affront. After meandering into conceptual cock and bull for so many fucking records, it stands to reason eventually the rubber band would break in the opposite direction. The Spider's Lullaby marks a deliberate departure for the King, being the first album in his recent career to intentionally eschew the full album fucking concept established on Abigail. Instead, it a clear return to his fatal portrait roots and an ode to Alice Cooper. Only the latter half conveys a coherent concept, with the remaining material representing standalone heavy metal mood pieces. Not uncoincidentally, the Spider's Lullaby further features some of the most direct tunes of the King's career, exchanging the occasionally indulgent borderline prog metal leanings of earlier efforts for songs that flat out fucking rock. Though you admittedly can see the 3 and 4 minute arrangements straining beneath the weight of some of the loftier lyrical concepts King Diamond was by now fucking famous for. But with music like this, who gives a good goddamn? The Spider's Lullaby, better than the world deserved in the heavy metal no man's land of 1995. Next!
See, the Spider's Lullaby was exactly like we wanted. We didn't want another concept album at that time. We'd done a lot lately, and it was like, you know, let's do something a little different. Just a little story, but individual songs, do something different, you know. And that's all fine, but it doesn't tend to get as theatrical as if you do a full concert. And the next one will be very spooky, I guarantee that, man. It's got horns.
The two of us are gonna play a little game. I think that I will call it trick or treat. Let us go hide and seek.
For metal bands adrift in the Badlands of the 1990s, there were two equally pernicious maladies at play. Those who simply gave up, and those legendary acts who opted instead to take stock of the scene around them, take aim at a younger, more relevant, commercially successful band that happens to devour 29 dicks in rapid succession, and in a cloying Hail Mary, how do you do fellow kids maneuver, emulate every last thing about them, and in so doing, discredit their entire career in the process. I'm happy to say King Diamond never went quite that far, but the closest he ever came was this record right here. In short, he turned up to a show one day to discover he'd be opening for a band that was actually admittedly inspired by him by the name of Metallica. Did a double take and said, "Metallica? You mean that bitch who was bald at age 8 who asked me to sign his Don't Break the Oath vinyl behind a Copenhagen crack house in 1902? We're opening for this clip-haired cunt stain now? Fuck this shit, Andy! Time to downtune and chug like the Dickens, you chode."
I know that you agree.
Is it awful? Far from it. Some of the first material I ever heard came from the goddamn Graveyard, and with the benefit of context, it's easy to see why bitches bridled at the chundering chug-a-chug riff vomit and deliberately piss-poor production here. That said, it almost accidentally skates clean past the obvious Metallica affectations from Black Hill Sanitarium to an all-too-familiar guitar tone, and yet at its best moments, the Graveyard's clumsy radio thrash fumbling somehow land closer to doom-laden Sabbath worship.
7 headstones in all, saying Lucy forever. I am not the guy I used to be, not since he put me away.
But even that, admittedly, ain't the best, which is a shame because the narrative of a young man who walks in on a perverse mayor Weinsteining the shit out of his own daughter and shut up in an asylum to silence him really ain't half bad and deserves a better musical accompaniment.
That's the difference between Merciful Fate and King Diamond. Merciful Fate is more, I'd say, spiritual-minded, religious-minded, kind of, where King Diamond is more social-minded. Even though you have the occult horror in there, there's a lot of themes from what's going on in today's society. And one of those things that is brought up on that album is child molestation, which makes me want to, You can't have that kind of people there. It's the same as killing a little child when they do that, to a little child. And they are released from prison 6 years later to do what? To go out and do the same again. And that's like a thing I've seen so many cases in Texas, for instance, but I know it's all over the world.
The Graveyard, not unlistenable, and even birthed a live slasher classic in Trick or Treat, mind you, but overall, a far cry from the King's finest. But the heavy metal goblin was in a groove regardless, and fortunately, the follow-up was a fucking fireball.
This one here gives me very much the feel of the old album Abigail we did, music-wise, and lyrical-wise. It's gonna be some of the heaviest we've done, that's for sure. It's getting pretty occult again, It's dealing a lot with voodoo in Louisiana, and also includes exorcism, and it's getting pretty heavy.
'90s naysayers, enjoy your steamin' bowl of crow, because when the King cranked out the first and arguably only fully disappointing release of his career in the Graveyard, far from a portent of things to come, it was destined to be a mere pit stop as he maintained a steady course to kick ass, the reasons for which Armyria, finally settling into a biannual schedule with Merciful Fate one year and King Diamond the next, King Kim was clearly feeling incrementally more comfortable with this satanic cycle by this point, but as anyone in an actual band will attest, a fair amount could also be credited to the new drummer, Jean-Luc Hébert, formerly of shred metal masters Chastain. In summation, when a guitarist gets a new toy to play with, the sparks generally fly. When an unerring shredmeister the caliber of Andy LaRocque gets his hands on the self-same, cling fast to your cocks and brace for badass. Then there was the thematic shift. In place of Victorian mansions, small-town conspiracies, and ambiguous hauntings, bestial bayou metal, the soundtrack to Papa Shango's wedding, VOODOO. And yes, that is a Dirt Nap Daryl solo on VOODOO, somehow shredding away despite the fatal plane crash that took the lives of promising US power metal band Pantera after the year 1989. What can I say? King Diamond has powers. From production to percussion, whatever bundle of raven feathers and housecat teeth King Diamond was slamming into his Satan-filleting veins was working on VOODOO. Even the latter half of this album, fast evolving into a glorified piss break on recent releases, sports some deep-cut classics.
From yesterday.
A lesser release in the King Diamond catalog? I'm not so fucking sure. I might even personally place it somewhere on the same level as the already underrated Spider's Lullaby as one of a cavalcade of classics that might have been if they hadn't suffered the grave misfortune of being birthed in the decade that killed classic metal. But said decade was fast coming to a close, and so too was the King's time with Merciful Fate.
What does the rest of this year hold for the band? Will you continue to tour into the new millennium?
No, everyone goes home. I take a vacation. I think everyone goes home. And then King Diamond the King Diamond band start writing material. And then it's probably Diamond's turn to kind of start a US tour, European tour, and then Merciful Fate kind of in standby position.
To date, the Diamond Demoniac had repeatedly fucking flirted with the prog metal subgenre and come out smelling like posies. Yet album after album, single after single, the King's cock merely grazed the gash of the home listening audience. But in 2000, he gently heaved us all over the divan, conceptual cock at full fucking mass, and in a hushed whisper said, "Now bend over and spell run." And so, screaming into existence came The House of God. Not merely one of the most ambitious and thematically consistent releases of the King's career, but almost intentionally the antithesis of Merciful Fate's last and to date fucking final offering, 9, which if the quality of the tunes is any indication is the same word German metalheads utter when someone tries to put this shit on the stereo. Where 9 was a rather cloying attempt to inject cartoonish 80s pseudo-Satanism back into the lyrics, here comes King with a concept album about Christ. No, not Danzig's guitarist. The messianic figure, religious icon, and only zombie in history that didn't send his followers screaming into the fucking hills. The premise? Jesus never truly died, and was instead jollied off to a church in southern France to fuck his prostitute paramour Mary Magdalene, there to establish a church for all gods of heaven and earth. This being a King Diamond concept album, naturally, there's a fucking curse on the joint loosely derived from the real-life legend of René Le Chateau. Themes of fatalism and religious disillusionment abound as he relays the tale of a young man who happens upon the aging citadel falling head over hooves for a mysterious enchantress named only Angel, only to learn she is merely seducing him because the curse of the church demands the sentinels stand there for all eternity, and she's planning for him to take her place. Refusing to be suckered by a curse worse than death, but still rocking blue balls the size of grapefruits, his natural solution is to try to take the cathedral down brick by brick. Not gonna lie, may be my favorite King Diamond concept to date. The only downside, sadly, is the dead as dog shit Pro Tools production. flat guitars, dull drums, and yet another subdued vocal performance take otherwise excellent material and smother the living shit out of it until all that remains is a muddy, modernized mess. Fortunately, though, the tunes remain, and Christ in a cocksuck, do they rip. All of them, though, which isn't always the songwriting's fault, for the record. Imagine even lackluster shit like This Place Is Terrible, but with drums and guitar that don't sound like a PlayStation synthesizer. Creating conflicts in your human mind. It doesn't matter who or what you think we are. Dark and devil, good and evil. Nothing live drums and a little reverb won't fix. I don't often advocate for re-recordings, King, but like, do it, dickwad. House of God is a good with a bad situation. Occasionally exceptional songs straining beneath the weight of limp, lifeless production over perhaps the most imaginative narrative ever penned by the Prince of Darkness. But King Diamond was about to push himself farther as a writer than ever the fuck before, my friends, helming his first true sequential sequel since the almighty Conspiracy, because over a full decade later, Abigail was back and she was fucking pissed. For all great horror films, an inferior exploitative sequel, and arguably the greatest horror metal hellbeast in existence, Abigail, got precisely that in an otherwise down year for heavy metal, 2002. And to its credit, it started out strong with some of the liveliest material in several albums like The Storm, Mansion in Sorrow, and Miriam, and an obvious production quality upgrade socking you flush in the ear cock from the outset. And then Wile E. Coyote meet Cliff. Abigail 2 rapidly descends from passable to puerile, with tracks like Little Ones, Slippery Stairs, and The Crypt quoting classics from erstwhile eras, and not even particularly good ones. But it's the insipid additions to the original classic story that are the most offensive aspect by far, with Abigail now the half-sister of some douche canoe named O'Brien, who turns out to be the leader of the titular Horsemen from the original album. It aims for Halloween 2 and lands on the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. By the end of this bullshit, you're begging for a Chinese Freddy fucking Krueger to pop the fuck up. Abigail 2, as such, sadly, will go down as a misguided metal sequel, albeit one with occasional bursts of brilliance, virtually all of which are situated at the outset of the album. Diamond had tried to revisit past glories and careened into a minor shitslick in the process. In all fairness, it was a new lineup and they needed time to congeal, and it didn't take long, fortunately. An all-new narrative had already begun to germinate in the maniacal mind of King Diamond, and it was a goddamn doozy.
Good evening. I'm King Diamond. I'm here to tell you the story of the Puppet Master.
I was more than passively familiar with King Diamond when I spotted the Puppet Master used in a local record store. Aware he'd kicked ass in the past, and further aware his more recent releases had gone down like a lighter at a farting contest, I said to myself, yeah, but by God, it's my duty to pay tribute to the king. And egad, am I glad I did. This record hit me clean in the crank, fresh from fucking nowhere. I expected nothing, and wound up enraptured by easily King Diamond's finest post-millennial masterpiece. The Puppet Master is a near-perfect fusion of coherent concept and classic songwriting, and it don't hurt that it's named after my favorite fucking horror series either. Dialing back on the elaborate Abigail and House of God concepts for a creepier, more personal, albeit puppet-centric fable where a young boy in Budapest suddenly discovers his bitch has been ganked, only to learn she's been abducted by, what else? A puppet master, who together with his wife has been abducting Hungarians, as if anyone would notice, and through demonic rites imbues their lifeless bodies with temporary animation to festoon the stage with the most lifelike murder marionettes this side of a CNN panel. Sadly, he learns this fact by being abducted himself. But when the puppet master is interrupted mid-satanic bullshit, something goes horribly wrong with the ritual, and instead of being temporarily animated, his eyes alone are given eternal life, so that he soon finds that he's been unwittingly sentenced to sit on a shelf for all eternity, glowering passively at a morbid mockery of the woman he once loved.
But I'm sure, I am dead sure I know those eyes. I see the eyes of Victoria, my love, my love. I cannot believe it's her eyes sitting in this puppet's head. But I know it's true. It is definitely her eyes. Blue eyes. They're alive, but they are so dead. We don't need words to speak. Our eyes speak for us. It's like our minds are now in our eyes. The puppet master sees that we're alive, and he says, "That's enough for today. Put them away."
But fuck the story, the songs carry this one. The title track, Magic, and the ode to eternal torment, Blue Eyes. Everything from the brief but badass opening track with actual vocals for a change, to the baroque speed metal of Living Dead drops the damn hammer. Serviceable to superb material is strewn the fuck throughout. The Puppet Master is a must-listen for those who scarcely venture outside the classic triumvirate of Abigail, Them, and Conspiracy. It was also with this album that the King's courtship to one Livia Zeta led to the introduction of occasional female vocals. You know, to sing the low parts, because King fucking Diamond. It doesn't add a ton, but during the sections referring to the doomed romance between the two puppet paramours, it adds a slight storytelling dimension to the darksome proceedings. It may be a sleeper to some, but to the coven of King Diamond, the Puppet Master is a modern horror metal masterwork. Next.
The apartment I lived in Denmark, it was haunted like you won't believe. And lots of people saw that stuff, you know. I mean, it was a daily occurrence for me, you know. I got very used to having it around, how things would move around and have been moved and being touched and things like that.
Can you tell one story, for example, please?
No.
The follow-up to The Puppet Master was a long time a-coming, and the news in the meantime was anything but encouraging. Rumors of ambiguous health woes, continuously canceled tours, both in America and abroad, with only the odd live album or best-of bullshit to remind us King Diamond still lived and breathed in the meantime.
I can give you a lot of rumors. I've died several times. You know, one time, Andy. That's years ago, you know, and the record label called me to ask me if I'd actually died. This girl kept asking me, is it really you? Is it really you? I fucking hope so.
One such tour I even had tickets to attend, only for the King to shit-can the entire tour mere weeks later. What we now know is that King Diamond, beyond the simple travails life throws at us all, like the birth of a child, marriage, and everything the fuck else, was actually suffering from a far more sinister ailment, an ongoing heart condition that left him face to the fucking wall.
You've had a few, let's just say, issues before you kind of came back to the stage. Some health concerns, right?
Had to go get a little more metal in here.
So there's a rod that goes straight down?
Right down the middle.
And is there another little one that goes across on the bottom?
I will get... It's coming.
I mean, was it challenging financially for you?
That was not the things I was thinking of, you know.
Okay.
I was thinking of trying to survive.
Yeah,
First of all, I was trying to... The things that mattered to me was it was a great thing to be able to lift a big glass of water. Be able to actually have strength to lift it.
Birthed in the shadow of such uncertainty, it stands to reason the production would be similarly troubled. And when the final product at last arrived, it's clear it kinda was. Hell, even the release seemed cursed from the outset, relaying a somewhat subpar story about yet another haunted mansion, albeit with an interesting patricidal twist, as it turns out the ghosts that haunt the place do so because their father killed the shit out of them before turning the gun on himself. Give Me Your Soul, Please suffered the sad fate of releasing its first single the day after the Chris Benoit murder-suicide. Yikes! And the music didn't fare much fucking better. Likely owing to his condition, King Diamond was well out of fucking form, confining himself to lower registers, belting out the occasional whisper scream, and almost never shrieking in his highest register. Some speculated it was a mere vocal issue. If Blathermouth only knew at the time, they could have spared themselves untold quantities of autistic energy. If that sounds like weak sauce, thanks to the always stellar fretcraft of Andy LaRocque, it winds up being more like mildly out of shape sauce, because while Give Me Your Soul Please is admittedly flabby on the fucking whole, it's still King Goddamn Diamond. In a sign of the times, with classic metal on a post-2004 upswing, the never-ending hill even netted King Diamond an honest-to-God Grammy nomination, the first of his fucking career, and who knows, with a stronger album on the whole, he may have even won it. In retrospect, this is a weak note to call it a career on, and fortunately from the sounds of it, it won't be, as King Diamond has undergone the much-needed heart surgery, made a full recovery, and as you see in his recent Songs for the Dead release, is still belting it out like a satanic Pavarotti.
I had to cut the cigarettes. My voice got cleared up. I sing better today than I ever did.
After a nutshot, but I have to admit, I harbor more than a slight soft spot for Give Me Your Soul Please. It's not the best music and far from the best story, but it still has that dash of Diamond delivery baked into the fucking crust. Once you work your way through literally everything else, go ahead and give it a spin. You might be surprised. Well, that tears it for the King Diamond edition of the Metal Mythos. As I alluded to earlier, it's worth mentioning that King Diamond recently made the rounds in media discussing yet another musical duology due for release at some nebulous point in the fucking future. I even considered putting this mythos off until after their release, but truth is, King's been cock-teasing those two albums since 2007. If I wait on this man to release new material, there's a 50-50 chance I'll molder into mythos dust and scatter to the 5 winds in the process. Either way, hail to the king, you cunts! I'm Razor Fist. Until we emerge once more from the mists of the Metal Mythos, God fucking speed.
This one isn't a virgin at all, but that's not fair. She has to be a virgin. Every holy sword of Metaricana is supposed to be a virgin. I don't get it. Girls these days have no sense of conduct whatsoever.
Are those Danish cigarettes?
Yeah, you want one?
No, thank you.
Smoke?
No, I don't smoke.
Come on, this is a good chance to start.